Look at this year revenue in 2020. Veritas brought in $22,034,000. I can only imagine with this Pfizer video. Here's what I think. It's the money. And I'll tell you why this. Some people are like, I think Pfizer came in and did something. I'm not so sure about that. That would be bad PR wise. Like, you don't want to pour fuel on a fire of a story by. There's a story of these activists who were protesting outside of a McDonald's, saying McDonald's was bad. McDonald's sued them, won, and then their stock tanked because the news reporting was that massive corporation attacks to private individuals. Pfizer's got to be like, everyone's cheering these guys on. If we go after them, it's going to hurt us. Let's ignore it. Here's what I think. In 2020, take a look at these numbers. In 2019, Project Veritas brings in $12,151,496. 1 year later, they nearly double their revenue to $22 million. How much money do you think is going to come in now that they had the biggest stories, this biggest story ever in the history of Veritas? I can only imagine they're going to hit 40, 50 million. Mm-hmm. Okay, maybe I'm way off with that.
40 was my first thought.
40, right? Now imagine you're on the board and you're like, guys, look how much money we have. I could never have. And then James says, we are not using the money for what you want. We are going to use the money the way I see it, and we're going to do the mission. And I don't think the board members necessarily are thinking I'm going to stuff my pockets, but they're saying something like, let's use the funds to build a new building and we can start doing this and that and we can put a gym there. And then James is like, we're going to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to expose this. You got to get rid of. This is what I said when we first got word that he was suspended. If you want access to the cash, you've got to get rid of the ideological founder who's standing in the way of that big pile of money. Mm-hmm. Now for them to come out with a new excuse that you is misappropriating funds, it's projecting.
Right.
It's what we typically see from these leftists. They accuse others.
Well, they got board members posting their pronouns in their Twitter bios.
And accusing someone else of malfeasance.
And how do board members get on boards? They donate to the organization,
typically,
right?
Yeah.
So if you had a year like this, and again, like I used to work in fundraising, the top amount of money comes from a very narrow number of donors typically, right? So I think, yes, they have really great grassroots support, but there are probably a couple new donors who saw the work they have done and said, I am willing to really either scale up what I'm giving or I'm willing to give a huge donation for the first time. Now, that's a threat to all the other board members, right? They are potentially going to lose their position if they are now competing with these other high dollar donors. I think that this is a sketchy thing to do, especially when your organization is doing so well, has this big story out, unless you personally feel threatened.
It seems like James is intimating it's Pfizer. He said the only thing that has changed is that we broke the biggest story in our organization's history during the last week of January in 2023 with 50 plus million views. Our video became a global phenomenon. He then goes on to add more context and says that is the only thing that has changed. Then suddenly an unusual emergency happened just a few days after the story, he continued. And then he says, on Thursday, February 2nd, I was informed by an officer of Veritas on the phone while en route to the airport that he would resign unless I stepped down as CEO.
I want to address the Pfizer connection. I got a question on my show over at The Blaze today. Someone asked me, what would be Pfizer's incentive to produce a product or any product that could potentially be harmful to its customers when its customers are people in need of healthcare? You and I aren't Pfizer's customers. Governments are. No one within the sound of my voice paid for a COVID vaccine. Governments paid for all of those. You're not paying for Paxlovid.
I know some people who did pay for it. Because they were doing like $100.
In general,
in general, right, yes.
Governments are...
I'm being pedantic.
I know, but governments, and that's all right to be exact, governments are the clients. What he put out with that video didn't put heat on Pfizer. They're indemnified going back to 1986, further under Reagan, further indemnified by the PERP Act under the PrEP Act under Trump. The heat's not on them. That hay's in the barn. They've cashed all those checks. The heat is on governments. People aren't calling Pfizer after they watch those videos. They know that nothing happens calling Pfizer. God bless, there was a group of New Yorkers over the weekend that did a rally in front of Pfizer, speaking my love language, chanting Nuremberg to Adam. I mean, that's my love language, but that doesn't do any good. The governments are the clients. Israel let Pfizer essentially experiment on their population for an entire year. That's what our government did. That's what almost every major government in the world did with Pfizer and Moderna. They let their people be the real-time human trial in real time in public. And so when he puts that video out, Pfizer, the horse doctor, Al Borla at Pfizer, he's not sweating it. Governments are.
The horse doctor.
Yeah, that's what he was. He was a horse doctor. All right. And so the veterinarian at Pfizer is not sweating it. The governments are. The governments are still somewhat, depending on what your views of elections are, somewhat still accountable to their people in ways that the corporation at Pfizer is not. And that's a whole new layer of heat. And it's not just our government. People around the world, guys, watched those videos and said, hey, why is the German... Do you guys know what's going on with excess deaths in Germany right now? They're higher right now than they have been in the entire time of COVID-19. They're higher right now in Germany, 40% higher than normal. That's higher than they were at the peak of the initial wave of COVID in 2020. How do we explain those things? His video opens up that entire Pandora's box for all these governments.
We'll slow down and go back and address a lot of this stuff. What's the name? Albert Borla?
Albert Borla,
and he was literally a horse doctor.
He was literally a horse doctor. So
but hold on. You're not being cute. You're like,
no.
He actually was treating horses specifically.
Yes. So when they tried to tell you that ivermectin was horse paste, no, it wasn't. Ivermectin's a Nobel Prize winning drug from 2015. It was repurposed for animal use because of how effective it was for humans. We do that with a lot of drugs, by the way. A lot of our human antibiotics are repurposed for animals. All right. He was actually a horse doctor. They're always guilty, guys. They're always guilty. They're always guilty of what you accuse you of. So Trump's compromised by a Russian P-tape. It turns out Hunter Biden is literally filming his compromat videos with Russian hookers while they're accusing that of Trump. They're always guilty of what they accuse you of.
That's actually interesting because we often talk about the Ukraine gate, how they accuse Trump of doing what Biden actually did. But the P-tape thing actually is a good point too because it was Hunter Biden.
Yes, but anyway, it's horse paste, but it was actually he's actually a horse doctor.
I wanted to point this out because I don't know, a lot of people probably don't like Rick and Morty, but you know the mom in the show, Beth, is a horse surgeon. And they make fun of her, calling her not a real surgeon, and she gets really offended by it. And it's just funny that this guy is like a horse doctor. He's like not a real doctor. He like works on horses. But I don't know. I just wanted to bring that up anyway. But here's what I think. I was going to have this question for you a few sentences ago, is that you talk about Nuremberg, you know, your book Rise of the Fourth Reich and all that. We've had a lot of libertarians come on this show and talk about. I don't know where you end up on the economic scale or whatever. I'm not entirely convinced that. This is a problem that is completely free or could be solved by laissez-faire capitalism or just straight capitalism. No. I think this is a problem of it. I think what happens is, as much as I prefer, you know, capitalist system over, say, like a socialist system, don't get me wrong, I do think there's still an issue here. And of course, the issue, let me slow down and walk through this because I understand government is a problem in this one. Here's the problem we face with solving an issue like this. Government mandates things because they're lazy, inept, evil, or otherwise. Some are ideological and think now's our chance. We have, you know, lockdowns are good for the climate and things like that. Others are panicked and say, well, my people are screaming, do something. They don't care what I do as long as I do something. Then along comes a big pharmaceutical company who you mentioned correctly. The governments are the customers. The government says, this is it. I'll take public funding. We'll buy products from this major pharmaceutical, and then it looks like I did something. The major pharmaceutical says, we don't care. We're immune, and we have guaranteed government contracts. So it's a perfect storm of government cronyism, government corruption.
You're describing fascism, of course.
Right. And ultimately what it is the lucrative merger of corporation and state.
Elites in the public and private sector, the classic definition of fascism.
But what I see culturally, governmentally, and in the corporate system, I don't necessarily believe is definitively mustache-twirling villains who are trying to destroy the planet. I know we've had many conversations about population reduction, about how, you know, the New York Times, I think it was the Times wrote that the lockdowns, the planet's healing now, and that maybe we need climate change lockdowns.
They literally use the line from Avengers Endgame when Captain America says, well, you know, after half the world was disappeared, the animals are back in the Hudson. Yeah.
Wow. But I kind of just feel like it's more like a Jackson Pollock painting than something as precise as Rembrandt. It is quite literally the chaos of our cultural decay, the system itself breaking down in every different area that we've got, cultural collapse, corporate and governmental collapse, that results in nobody wanting to take responsibility for the hard decisions and just saying path of least resistance and leave me the F alone. And so we get all of this mess.
I think it's all of the above. I think that, first of all, the number one issue at play here is the spiritual and moral decline of the West. And you are watching a level of spiritual darkness and malevolence. We had a private dinner with Tucker Carlson out in Iowa this summer when he came out to MC an event for us. And one of the questions we asked him was, hey, what happened to the bow-tied, smiling libertarian who was friends with Rachel Maddow on MSNBC and CNN and thought, frankly, people like us, these dreaded, Jesus freaks, that we were the death knell of the Republican Party and we're going to be the reason why y'all never won any elections. How did you become our favorite talk show host? What happened with you? Because this isn't the same guy that was on MSNBC 20 years ago. And he said something I thought that was very profound and I think really does sum up the era in which we live. He said, I'm a kid. I grew up in Georgetown, Tucker said. My dad was a GOP operative. Everybody I was around were political, kids of politicians or political operatives. We trick-or-treated together. We hung out together. We went to school together. We did Christmas together. I could see why someone might think Medicare and Medicaid might be the best way to help a certain disadvantaged group of people, even if my ideology doesn't agree, but I don't think that causes me suspicion about your motivations. He says what's happened in this current era in America, and really throughout the West, is decisions are being made that no one truly benefits from. Like, we can disagree vehemently, ideologically about affirmative action, but somebody is affirmatively benefiting from that, even if we think the overall collateral damage doesn't justify it, and you disagree with that, there is someone benefiting from it. No one benefits from kids being sent off to the island of Dr. Moreau for meatball surgery. No one's benefiting from that. No one's benefiting from the stuff that we're talking about right now. And he said, when I analyze this as a kid who just grew up in the traditional political process, and I see people and I go to my liberal friends and I'm asking, why are you guys doing stuff like this? And they suddenly don't have answers, but they're just going to do them anyway. He goes, that's when I just had to realize that there's a level of spiritual darkness at play here. That's the only thing I can explain when this level of nihilism, and that's what you just described, Tim, a comprehensive nihilism, whether it's people's craven greed, whether it's they've given themselves, another group has given themselves over to Malthusian ethics at a nihilistic Nietzschean level, of depopulation, whether it's all of those things, whether it's stupidity, whether it's complacency, pour all that stuff in a cauldron, add a little dash of newt and an eye of bat, and a cup of water and boil it together and pour it out. And what you see is systemic decline of a civilization. And that's what we're living through right now.
How do we reinvigorate spirit? Like, Jesus tried, but they just killed him off and made a religion out of him. And they're like, worship him now. And it's like, dude, he was trying to wake people up to God. How do we... Anytime I've seen in the past, people try, they get co-opted and cults get made out of them. And then the war machine moves on. The Roman Empire started a church.
Well, here's what I would say. No one remembers almost any of the names of the Roman war machine. Everybody still remembers Jesus' name. We mark time, by the way. We mark time. Human civilizations mark time by the birth and death of Christ. All right, the most attended worship event of the year in human civilization for going on a second epoch is the marking of the resurrection of Christ, followed only by the marking of the birth of Christ. So I would argue his legacy is very intact. It's those of people like me who believe that he is God, that he was resurrected, and the testimonies that we have of the changes that have gone on in our lives, and then we have gone on and helped other people and do things that are beyond our normal capability, so we don't give ourselves over to the nihilism that Tim talks about. I would argue his legacy is intact. All the people that put him to death, they're all in the ground. All right, nobody cares about any of them, but Christ is still exalted and hailed and worshiped 2,000 years later. So I think his legacy is in really good shape.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. Hang out with us live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and become a member over at timcast.com for uncensored, members-only shows exclusive. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.